My Govanen, it is well that I meet you. I am the Tolkien Shed, and I have seen the Lord of the Rings. The real Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring, to be exact. It is always a joy, but this time it also helped me to get rid of bad taste that the Rings of Power left. However, the trouble with this piece of media is not over, for the time has come for the Season 1 of the Rings of Power review. The time has finally come to answer the question, did Amazon amaze? Well, the show was advertised as the story that Tolkien never wrote. No wonder he never wrote it, he was a good writer. So yes, Amazon did amaze by what they did, but probably not in the way it was intended. Now let's look closer at the elements of this show, at the plot, the characters, the world building, and being faithful to the source material. Let's start off with the summary of the plotline with Galadriel and Númenoreans, until Galadriel arrives in Eregion. So, we see her hunting Sauron, but nobody believes her when she says that the Dark Lord is still out there. She is sent away, but she jumps off the ship and decides to swim across the ocean. Then she is rescued by a lucky chance and meets with Halbrand and Elendil and arrives in Númenor. There, she tries to offend everyone, but despite her best efforts, she still makes friends. There, by another lucky chance, she sees the map of the Southlands for the first time in her life, and at the same time is given a manuscript with all Sauron's plans written on them. So now she knows that she must go to the Southlands. She demands an army and she gets one. She sees the coming doom of Númenor, she manipulates Halbrand, and finally arrives in the Southlands. There is a fight, and suddenly, when she prepares to commit war crimes, there is a volcano eruption. However, they all those who we know by name, survive the pyroclastic flow. So when it makes it so we can have no stakes in the Southlands, everybody decides to leave. By a lucky chance, Halbrand is wounded, so Galadriel jumps at the chance to kill him. For 6 days, she tortures the troubled, wounded man by a restless journey on the back of the horse. But her plan backfires because the plot armor from the Southlands is still on. Halbrand arrives in Eregion with Galadriel. Meanwhile, the Númenorians return to their island, and we learn that their king is dead. Now, let's look at the Southlands. There, the Elves still hold guard over the Southlanders, despite the fact that at least 1,000 years have passed until they joined Sauron. But they are now finally called off, and one of them, Arondir, meets with this local healer to say goodbye, but they find out that there is some disease. Then they find out that there is the whole system of tunnels under the whole country. Arondir is caught, and it turns out that it's the orcs and their leader, Adar. Arondir fights for freedom, but fails, but then he is released to deliver an obvious message, and he is given his weapons back. Meanwhile, the Southlanders, under the leadership of Bronwyn, decide to hide in the Elven Watchtower, but unfortunately they forgot the food. So Theo, Bronwyn's son, who has found some evil-looking sword, goes back to the village There he meets some orcs, but is saved by Arondir, and they both come to the Elven Tower. There they find a sculpture of this evil sword. Some Southlanders leave to join Adar, and the others that remained prepare for battle. Their great battle plan is to leave a defensive position and to fight in an open field against greater forces. So, well, of course, they are doomed, but they are fortunately saved by the coming Númenoreans. However, the sword, this evil sword, is stolen from them, is taken from them, and now we learn what it served, and it is a key. Just a key. It's nothing malicious there. So this key opens a dam that by long work of the orcs and slaves is now connected to the Mount Doom, and the water flows into there and the volcano erupts. But as it was said earlier, everybody that we know survives, so now they can leave the Southlands and live in another place. And Adar and his orcs stay in the Southlands that are now named Mordor. Now let's look at the events in Moria, Eregion and Lindon. Celebrimbor and Elrond are given a quest from the High King Gil-galad to build a forge. However, they are provided no help in that task, so they ask the Dwarves for help. Durin, Elrond's friend and Dwarven prince, seems to have some argument with Elrond, but later we see that no, it was rather him not sending an invitation for his wedding and then blaming Elrond. This is still unclear, but after all, they are friends again, and now the dwarves help Celebrimbor to build this forge. Later, we learn that the dwarves have been mining something new, a new metal, mithril, which possesses some magical properties. It is later revealed that it is a key for saving the elves from certain death. A certain death that we learn about after a long time, and after we haven't seen anything to prove that it's happening. And at the end of the show, we still haven't seen anything that would, worry us about the elves. But this great conflict and great need is presented. So Elrond asks the Dwarven King to sell the elves some of mithril, but the king refuses. So Elrond, with only one shard of mithril, goes back to Eregion, and then with this one shard of mithril, Celebrimbor, with the help of Halbrand, forges the 3 elven rings of power. And they meant to help this great danger that faces the elves, but we never learn how. Now let's see what the show has to tell us about the Hobbits. The storyline is not connected with any other. Near the place where the Hobbits camp, or the Half-Woods, it's how the show calls them, a man falls from the sky. One of the Hobbits, Nori, helps him, and all the others want to kill her for that. But soon, the stranger proves useful. But soon he proves dangerous. But soon he proves useful. And then he proves dangerous again. So finally they cast him away. But somebody is following him, some strange cultist. So the Hobbits decide to follow him too. there they find out that this strange cultist take the stranger for Sauron. They fight the cultist. The stranger finds power that will conveniently disappear a moment after to defeat the cultist, and they all go back to their camp, a new camp at least, and well, it is revealed that the stranger is Gandalf, and now Nori will go with him to the far land of Rhûn. Now let's have a look at some evil plans of one of the most important characters in the show, Halbrand, aka Sauron. Well, to be honest, I cannot point out some plan that he had. He couldn't have known that he would meet Galadriel in the open sea. He couldn't have known that he will arrive in Númenor. And, well, he opposed the idea of going to the Southlands. Galadriel had to push him towards this goal, and there he was crowned, well, not crowned, but announced as a king, and he fought against the orcs, but they still managed to complete their plans, and then by chance he was wounded, and he arrived in Eregion. There he decided to help Celebrimbor in his attempt of making some powerful rings, and also he decided to reveal himself to Galadriel as Sauron and to kill her, but not for you. So he left and arrived in Mordor. I cannot really say what was his plan. Now we move right into the world building, and well, we start with some elements, some details that are basically useless, that fill the story and achieve no further purpose. We start with some smaller ones, for example, hitless fire that accompanies the stranger falling down from the sky, or the Hobbits' sign language that is used only once, or the orcish claws that seem to be able to destroy a sturdy table, to be very dangerous, but only this one time. And we should now mention a bigger problem. For example, the whole storyline that concerns Hobbits and Gandalf. It is in no way connected to the main storyline. It does not influence it. It is there like a side quest in a game. It achieves nothing. It has no meaning in this world, and so we do not see anything that it makes. So is the case with Aryan and Kemen. These are the characters of the show, arguably, but well, again, these characters do not do anything meaningful and are just inserted there. Maybe they will play a bigger role later, but now the storylines were just unnecessary. And, well, there were also some plot elements that were simply forgotten. For example, the fact that Halbrand was meant to unite the people of the Southlands. And, well, first of all, who was there to unite except for a few villagers? But his presence in the Southlands achieved nothing. It was, he was announced a king, but they did well, the Southlanders did well without the king. Well, they did the same, and was saved by Númenoreans. The king did nothing meaningful. So this whole reason that was the reason for Halbrand going to the Southlands was really purposeless. And we should also talk about some baits, something to distract us from the real identity of Halbrand, which is, for example, the whole storyline of Gandalf and the cultists. Well, so yeah, I was mistaken. It plays a role. It is a bait. It's meant to deceive you and think that maybe Halbrand is not Sauron. It does poor job because I don't think many people believed that this stranger that later was revealed to be Gandalf was evil Dark Lord, and that the cultists that followed him were one of them was Sauron, but still it was a bait. And there is another example in a form of Balrog. It's intriguing element because there is only one scene with him, and this is a scene that we see also in a trailer. So it seems that Balrog was used as a bait. The story with him didn't go anywhere, but it was put in a trailer like it played an important role. It was to draw people to the show, but well, the show did nothing more with Balrog. So this another example of a bait. Now let's look at a vital world-building element that is dialogue. First, let's start with some good lines from the show. It is this line about which Gandalf says to this cultist, "Go back to the shadow from whence you came." And another line that is meant to describe Galadriel, as fair as the sea, stronger than the foundations of the earth. And the funny one, when in doubt, always trust your nose. Wait, these are not original lines. These are all from the Lord of the Rings, the real one. So maybe let's look at some original ones. There is a tempest in me. You have not seen what I have seen. A dog may bark at the moon, but it will never bring it down. Do you know why the ship floats and the stone sinks? I am good. Give me the meat and give it to me raw. Why do you keep fighting? Because I cannot stop. And of course, the sea is always right. Yeah. So that is the original dialogue. I wish I never had it because it's severe pain in my brain. Well, yeah, so several lines are not good, and overall, the dialogue is pretty atrocious, with several non sequiturs, with people answering the questions that were never asked, and never answering the questions that were asked, with, well, providing information that we all well know and omitting the vital information. That's the dialogue in this show. There are other troublesome elements in the show. For example, the timeline. The timeline requires its own separate video. Let's just mention that in Númenor, at most 3 weeks pass in the show, and at the same time in Eregion a great forge is built, which I cannot believe that it takes only 3 weeks to build. It must have been at least several months, but the timelines seem to connect, so there is glaring inconsequence. Speaking about inconsequences, there are various examples of that in the show. For example, the sunlight and its effect on the orcs. Sometimes they can't stand it. They just burn in the rays of the sun. But in other moments, the orcs just use hoods and clothes, and they are okay. So, well, that's it. And there is this moment when Galadriel is restricted to the palace ground, and she leaves the palace, and nobody remembers that she was restricted, and nobody mentions it. There is this love and hate relationship between the Elves and Númenoreans, because Númenoreans are pretty loud about their hate for the Elves, but in an episode later, there is this whole army of volunteers that decides to go with an elf to the Southlands to fight alongside her. And there is this saying of the Hobbits: nobody goes off trail, nobody walks alone. And every time they say it, somebody walks off trail or somebody is left alone. And well, there are also questions, many questions that require answers, and the answers are not provided. So why would Sauron put his whole plan on his sigil? Why do hobbits migrate? It would be safer for them to stay in one place. Why does Númenorian army count only 300 or 500 men? Why are the elves dying? This question I repeat over and over again, but I still do not have an answer. Who built the dam in the Southlands? Why nobody knew about it? Why nobody noticed the tunnels that led from it to the Mount Doom? What was the purpose of the sword? It could be replaced. It didn't play any significant role. The dam could be opened many different ways. And why nobody noticed that there was something going bad in the Southlands? The elves in Lindon should notice that. The soldiers should be returning, but there are no news from them, so maybe you should look for them, but nobody cares for the Southlands and the soldiers there. And even when Galadriel arrives in a region, nobody talks about the Southlands in the context of going there and helping the people that are there. The Southlands are simply forgotten. And even more important questions: what are the powers of the Rings of Power? How does making a circle help the Elven problem? That is, them dying and needing the Mithril's light. It was the quantity that was the problem, not the shape. But now, suddenly making a ring is an answer to all problems. So yeah, that's the world building in the show. Now let's discuss the characters of the show. Let's start with antagonists. Let's deal with the cultists. They're not really characters, they're plot devices. The only thing we know about them is that they were powerful and they served Sauron. That's it. We learn more about Adar, and well, he seems more relatable than most of the characters of Protagonists. Well, he cares for his children, the orcs, He sees their worth, he fights for them and wants to give them land to live in. He is respected by them. If I rooted for anyone in the show, it would be probably him that I would root for. And well, now let's move to Sauron. And I must say, if we weren't told at the beginning that the Sauron is the villain of the show, and if we of course didn't know the lore, he wouldn't seem to be the villain. He still does not seem to be one. He seems to have changed. If it was said only by him, I wouldn't trust him, but Adar also confirms that he seeks for the power to heal Middle-earth. Of course, he still isn't a paragon of virtue. He's aggressive, he attacks Númenorian smiths, for example, and he pursues his own goals and betrays Galadriel when it's useful to him. But overall, he's not that bad. He fought against the orcs, he saved Galadriel, he saved Elendil, one thing that he might regret in the future. He still seeks power, but to save Middle-earth. If anybody pushed him towards evil, it is Galadriel. So what I'm trying to say, that Sauron Halbrand is not the villain the show portrays him as. And now, someone I have no doubts about. Galadriel. Clearly the villain. She has done worse than Sauron. Even though he is hiding himself and says he's changed. And she has done worse. And she's definitely less likable. She's proud, petty, angry, demanding, arrogant, self-centered, and spiteful. And her actions speak for themselves. She offends everyone. She accuses Halbrand of leaving his companions while she did the same. She lies about Númenoreans owing something to the Elves. She believes to be better than anyone. Instead of thanking Elendil for saving her life, she belittles him. She demands an army. She, while in jail, attacks the gods and achieves nothing basically by it, and only divine intervention makes it so that the queen changes her mind. She humiliates some cadets. She, manipulates Halbrand to join the expedition. And, in the Southland, she stops being the unlikable protagonist and she becomes the villain. She threatens to torture the orcs and promises to commit genocide, or orcicide, I guess, and to make Adar see every single one of his children die. And, then for a short moment she seems to have lost her faith in herself and blames herself for the loss of the battle. But soon she's back on track and, in her path of revenge, she rejects Sauron and does not want to hear that he has changed. That's the reason why he leaves. But later she pursues his plan of making the rings. She is clearly meant to be the protagonist, the main character, somebody to, for us to relate to. But she is the worst character, not only in likability, but also morally. She is the worst. Now let's move to the protagonists. Unfortunately, there is not much to be said about most of them. They seem one-dimensional and pretty simplistic. Let's start with Elrond. He is a liar. He lies to his friend Durin uh, several times, and he betrays his oath and shows Mithril to Celebrimbor. But, otherwise, he seems to value his friendship with Durin, and, well, he is gentle and well spoken. But this lying thing does not uh, not make him good in my eyes. Well, Durin is the closest that we have to a good character. He's not free from flaws. For example, well, the fact that he didn't invite Elrond to his wedding. At least that's what I believe. And the fact that he, while pretending to be away, meets with Disa in the open, and that's how Elrond finds out about the Mithril. But on the good side, most of the good dialogue in the show comes from him, and he truly values his friendship with Elrond, and he does not betray him or lie to him. He hides some truth, but after all, reveals it. He's dedicated to his friend's cause, to all Elves' cause. He opposes his father when he thinks that his father is wrong. Durin might be quick to anger, but he's also quick to forgive and to trust. Now, Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, basically he makes several atrocious decisions without good reason, and that's the most characteristic feature I can think about him. Celebrimbor is said to be the greatest craftsman alive, but at the same time he does not know anything about forging the rings. He has to be told about a technique that is making alloys, and that's embarrassing. Now, in Númenor, the characters of Númenor. Let's start with Elendil. He is the second good one. He seems to be a good father. He truly cares for his son Isildur and tries to put him on the right path. When he loses, or presumably loses him, he seems to have lost hope, but not dedication. But, well, he has one flaw: he trusts Galadriel, and that's a great mistake. On the other hand, Isildur is lost. That's what we can say. He does not know what to do, does not know where to go. He just wanders and does whatever. In one moment he wants to go to the west, but in the other he decides that he will not go there. He decides that he will go to the Southlands, and so on. He is, well, I don't understand him. He's just lost. Now, the Queen Regent Miriel. She is a proud leader that tries to find a path between her father's way and the will of the most of Númenorians. But also she is to be blamed for all Númenorian decisions that, raise questions. For example, sending only 500 men to the Southlands, not providing more ships when two were destroyed, leading a charge against an enemy that is not known, sending no scouts, or not checking if Halbrand has any right to the Southland, the throne of the Southlands. Now, let's move to the characters from the Hobbit storyline, and we get Gandalf. So I know Gandalf as a wise, friendly, maybe sometimes severe or uh, serious uh, wizard, but a great companion. Here, he is a mumbling beggar, and that's the impression I get. Now, his companions, Nori and Poppy, uh, I don't really mind them. I don't really, root for them. Uh, they are somewhat likable. Poppy is the more uh, reasonable one. Nori is more adventurous, keen, and curious. And uh, they are better than the other hobbits because they do not want to leave other hobbits alone because they are the ones that are left. that not exactly left, but still some other hobbits want to just see them die. And now in the Southlands, Arondir and Bronwyn, they are definitely not romantic characters. I would almost abstain from calling them characters. Who even are they? What can be told about them? They kiss and all, but there is no emotion between them, no real care, no struggle, nothing that binds them together. And Arondir would sacrifice Bronwyn's life in order to protect the secret of the sword. So, is there true love between them? I don't think so. And so, what else can be said about them? Except for the fact that they are pushed into this relationship by the writers. And now Theo, Bronwyn's son, he's a brave child. He has some troubles, maybe anger issues, and he admires Galadriel. Again, a mistake that nobody should make. But he loves his mother dearly, and his bravery is sometimes I wouldn't say inspiring, but good to look at. So maybe not all is lost for the characters, but most of them, if they do not make idiotic decisions, are just bland and forgettable. Unfortunately, that's the characters of the show. And now, the source material and being faithful to it. Oh man. Strap in. Basically, the show has no respect for the source material, for the books that Tolkien wrote, for the stories that he hinted at and that he sketched. There is no respect for the history of Middle-earth. Basically, only the names are correct. And let's discuss some more apparent issues. The rings of power are not made like that. The rings that belong to the men and the dwarves were made first. Sauron did not appear in the history of the Second Age like that. He wasn't allowed to enter Lindon by Gil-galad. Galadriel from the start did not trust him. In Númenor, Miriel never ruled. And the issues with the timeline shouldn't even be mentioned. It's a giant mess. Nothing should be connected if we followed the true story, the true timeline. Hobbits, Balrog, and Gandalf are all part of the Third Age, not the Second Age. History, the wizards came to Middle-earth not falling from the sky, but on ships. And in the Second Age, Valinor is still a real land, a physical land in Adar. Gil-galad has no right to decide who will go there. The fate of Silmarils is known. None ended up in a tree, and none led to the creation of Mithril. And also Celeborn, the husband of Galadriel, is alive. He's alive in the Third Age. We see him in the Fellowship of the Ring. So the fact that he's now dead is another painful change that was unnecessary. And well, there's also this fact that Númenor still has colonies in Middle-earth in the Second Age when it comes to the war with Sauron. But in the show, it is mentioned as some old colonies, nothing significant, where they played a great role in the history of Númenor. And another thing is the romance between Arondir and Bronwyn. It shouldn't be a thing. There is a reason why there were only 3 or 4, if we count the ancestors of Prince Imrahil, 3 such relations. The relation between a human and an elf. To insert another means that you have something meaningful to say through that story. That this story will be vital to the plot. That these characters will change the world. But here in the show, the story of this unusual love between an elf and human woman could be omitted, and the show wouldn't lose anything. It does not move the plot that they are in love. It does not change anything. And there was an opportunity for it to mean something, at least in a slight bit. Because if Arondir was the one to reveal the secret of the sword to Adar when Bronwyn's life was at risk, well, it would have its impact on the story. It would definitely make me believe that there is love between them, and it would be a real struggle for these characters to know that Arondir saved Bronwyn, but at the same time put the lives of so many people at risk. There would be real conflict, and it would influence the story, but, well, it is not the case. It does not. This romance is unnecessary. And so are so many of the changes that were introduced in this show. They show no respect, but, well, the fact that the showrunners, the writers, use Tolkien's name and Tolkien's work just as a cover-up. They say that it is Middle-earth, but what is left with all these changes? Only the names. So, to conclude this discussion, let's compare this show with another piece of art that bears the same name, The Lord of the Rings. Let's compare it with Peter Jackson's trilogy. So, Jackson's trilogy is remembered as a masterpiece, as an example of how to adapt a story, how to do something great. It is an example for future generations. And Amazon's show will also be an example, but an example of how not to write a story, of how not to use the work of great authors. It is an example of pride that didn't reach anywhere near what it claimed to be. It is an example of greed that provided no worth. It is a cautionary tale, a warning. I ask you to recall the best moments of this show and to compare it with Jackson's trilogy. Compare it and cherish it, cherish the movies, and cherish the truth. For the truth is that beauty, respect, and faithfulness will always conquer mockery, deception, and disdain. The show tries to be as the movies, tries to, well, be the Lord of the Rings in the Second Age. So it inserts everything that was in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It inserts the story of Hobbits, it inserts a wizard, Gandalf himself, Balrog. It inserts the story of a romance between a man and an elf. And, well, it does not achieve its purpose here because it's not well written, it is not used properly. The addition of these elements that have no place here in this timeline to, well, the horrible dialogue, the even more atrocious writing decisions and events that make no sense. It all concludes in a giant mess that, well, has only the name and nothing beyond that. And that's it. That's the Rings of Power. And now the time has come to, well, share what I have found during this long journey, during watching the Rings of Power. When I was preparing my reviews, I was always also checking out other creators, and I want to recommend them to you. First of all, Lana Marie with her costume design analysis and overall analysis of how the show looks. There is also Just Some Guy with a different and definitely deeper look on the lore. There is Disparu with interesting information on behind the scenes and, well, long analysis, and Shadiversity and Night's Watch with even longer analysis and a deep dive on the battles in the show, and Crappy Movie Fans with his flawless satire. I recommend all of them, and if you do not grow tired of the Rings of Power content, I will be still here putting out more, because I plan on making even longer analysis of particular elements of the show that make it fail. For example, as I mentioned here, the timeline. It requires some further discussion. And I also plan on making a different series about, well, creating something better from what we get. So basing on the premises that the show gives, I will try to construct a better story. We'll see how it goes. I will be waiting there for you. I hope to see you very soon. Fare you well. Novayer, Namarie.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.